There's a story most people aren't being told about what's happening right now. It's not a political story. It's not a left versus right story. It's a structural story that has been running for at least 9 years, and the capability behind it was being built for nearly a decade before that. If you've been following along with the work, you already know most of the pieces. What I want to do tonight is connect them, because once you see the full shape, the headlines stop being individual events. They become evidence of a pattern that has been operating in plain sight for years across two administrations that publicly disagreed on virtually everything else. Start with the framing question. Who is the operation actually targeting? The answer isn't a country. It isn't a political party. It isn't even a single industry. The target is a class of actors who operate across sovereign jurisdictions rather than within them. They hold passports, but they're not loyal to the countries those passports came from. They're loyal to the system they're part of. Think of it like McDonald's. McDonald's isn't loyal to any country it operates in. It just opens franchises everywhere it can extract value. The network we're talking about works the same way it extracts from sovereign states instead of consumers. The franchise locations sit inside law firms in New York, inside defense ministries in Moscow, inside central committees in Beijing, inside royal households in Riyadh, inside cabinet positions in Mexico City, inside banks in Frankfurt and Zurich and London. Every one of those locations has appeared in the enforcement architecture in the past 18 months. A Cambodian senator designated by OFAC, a former president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo on the SDN list, two former Chinese defense ministers sentenced to death, 4 consecutive Russian Defense Ministry deputies prosecuted in 18 months, a sitting Mexican state governor indicted alongside 9 officials, 97 Saudi government officials detained in a single sweep, 30 lawyers from Sidley, Latham, Goodwin, and Wachtell indicted as a decade-long insider trading network, an Iraqi deputy oil minister sanctioned for running an Iranian oil smuggling network. That's not a coincidence, Wave. That's a pattern. The pattern is sovereign versus network enforcement happening simultaneously across 5 major powers in compressed time. Now, the part most people miss: on December 20th, 2017, 3 days before Christmas, Executive Order 13818 was signed, blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuse or corruption. The text of that EO does something specific. It declares a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It authorizes the Treasury Secretary to freeze any foreign person's assets anywhere in the world who is involved in serious human rights abuse or corruption. It includes a cascade clause. Anyone who materially assists, sponsors, or provides financial or technological support to a designated person can themselves be designated. It allows asset freezes with no prior notice, and it permits a classified annex of designations whose targets are subject to visa restrictions, but whose names are not made public. That's the legal architecture. National emergency, worldwide reach, cascade clause, classified targets. The 13 names in the original 2017 annex were modest. Gertler, a few arms dealers, a few human rights abusers. By December 2023, more than 650 foreign persons had been designated under the same authority, 70 more in 2024. The architecture wasn't built for 13 people. It was built to scale. Then comes the part that resolves whether this is a partisan operation or something else. EO 13818 has been renewed every year on the anniversary of its signing for 9 consecutive years. 2 administrations that fought publicly about everything: Russia, immigration, COVID, the border, the courts, January 6th, election integrity, Hunter Biden, classified documents, quietly protected the same national emergency declaration for 9 straight years. Never lapsed, never revoked, always renewed before the deadline. When you see institutional continuity that extreme across that much political turbulence, the explanation is not partisan politics. The explanation is that whatever the operation is, it sits underneath partisan politics. Both sides protect it because both sides are operating under it. There's a second piece of evidence that points the same direction, and nobody has ever publicly explained it. Until 2018, the U.S. Marshal Service held public Bitcoin auctions, seized BTC from Silk Road, from various other crypto cases. They'd announce it, they'd run a sealed bid auction, they'd liquidate it. That had been the standard operating procedure since 2014. Then in 2018, the auction stopped. For 7 years, the US government accumulated seized Bitcoin without selling it. By the time Trump signed the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Executive Order in March 2025, the federal government held over 200,000 Bitcoin, accumulated quietly through forfeiture across the entire 7-year window. When the SBR executive order was signed, Trump didn't create the hold policy. He formalized a policy that had already been operational for 7 years. Who ordered the 2018 auction halt? When was that decision made? Under what authority? Nobody in government has publicly explained it. The 7-year hold policy preceded the executive order that named it by almost a full presidential cycle. That's the evidence locker thesis in a single sentence. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve isn't being built through open market purchases. It's being built through forfeiture. And it has been quietly under construction since 2018, before the public knew the architecture existed. On May 4, 2026, DOJ filed a $15 billion Bitcoin civil forfeiture against the Cambodian Prince Group founder, the largest single Bitcoin forfeiture action in history. 26 days later, that Bitcoin will start moving to U.S. Marshals Service custody, and from there to the Treasury balance sheet. One filing increased the SBR's accumulation pipeline by 7.5% of its current total holdings. That is not the action of a country panic buying its way into a strategic reserve. That is the action of a country that has been quietly accumulating one for 7 years and is now starting to formalize what it has. Now connect this to what's happening across the other 4 major powers. Russia is purging its defense ministry. 4 consecutive Shoigu deputies prosecuted. Pavel Popov, 19 years. Rosatom nuclear executives detained on bribery. Salikov arrested. Chelyabinsk vice governor plus 2 senior regional officials in custody. China is purging its People's Liberation Army. 2 former defense ministers sentenced to death, suspended. Zhang Yuxia and Liu Zhenli under investigation. He Weidong absent from public view. The CCDI just opened a case against the Hefei party secretary, who was being positioned as a rising star of 7th-generation leadership. China Eastern Airlines former chairman indicted. Hikvision, the world's largest surveillance company, had 300 executives detained in the counterintelligence purge. Saudi Arabia is purging its bureaucracy. Nazaha, the anti-corruption authority, detained 97 government officials in April. Another 127 in January. PIF project managers indicted for bribery. Bahrain just arrested 41 people connected to Iran's IRGC in a Gulf-coordinated espionage sweep and sentenced 14 more. India is at peak ED enforcement intensity. Punjab cabinet minister Sanjeev Arora arrested 2 days ago. Anil Ambani named as the uncharged kingpin in a 40,000 crore bank fraud case before the Supreme Court. EDFY26 asset attachments hit a record Rs at 81,422 crore. Mexico, sitting state governor of Sinaloa, sitting senator, deputy AG, police commanders, the mayor of Culiacan, all indicted in a single SDNY action. CJNG dismantled at the leadership tier. El Mencho killed. El 85 pleaded guilty. El Jardinero arrested. El Güero Conta seized. The succession field for the world's most powerful cartel narrowed to 2 remaining candidates within 60 days. And these are 5 sovereigns who do not coordinate with each other. The US and Russia are at the edge of proxy war over Ukraine. The US and China are in active sanctions exchanges. Saudi Arabia and Iran are in a regional Cold War. India and China have border disputes. None of them announce joint operations. None of them issue joint statements. None of them coordinate timelines through any visible mechanism. But every one of them is dismantling the same network class inside their own borders on overlapping timelines. The framework's strongest single observation is this: 5 sovereigns are hunting the same network class without opposing each other's enforcement actions and without ever publicly admitting they are doing it. Each sovereign has its own reasons. The network was extracting from all of them. The network was capturing their elites, distorting their policy, siphoning their state revenues, compromising their security services. Each sovereign decided enough was enough. Its structural alignment of sovereign interests against a shared parasite class. Underneath the enforcement, an entirely new financial architecture is being constructed, not patched, replaced. Layer 1, the strategic Bitcoin reserve, built through forfeiture, civil forfeiture under 18 U.S.C. Section 981 is the accumulation mechanism. The $15 billion Cambodian Prince Group filing was the largest single feed event in history. The architecture predates the executive order that named it by 7 years. Layer 2, Genius Act stablecoins, passed July 2025. Implementation through OCC licensing, FinCEN, OFAC AML rules, FDIC, and NCUA program requirements. Stablecoins becoming the regulated, monitored, transparent settlement layer for US dollar-denominated digital transactions. Every stablecoin transaction creates a richer compliance record than any cash transaction ever could. Layer 3, a pending sovereign reserve instrument, likely gold-linked. Treasury Issuance Authority, hard close November 4th, 2026. If it materializes, it's the closest thing to a literal Bretton Woods event since Nixon broke gold convertibility in 1971. Underneath those 3 layers, the supervisory architecture is being rebuilt. The April 7th, 2026 BSA AML CFT program overhaul, issued jointly by FinCEN, OCC, FDIC, and NCUA, is the most significant restructuring of bank AML compliance in over 20 years. The reputation risk elimination rule eliminates the supervisory tool used since 2013 to debank crypto firms, lawful cannabis businesses, and disfavored sectors. CFPB workforce cut by 80%. Section 1071 Small Business Lending Rule narrowed. ECOA disparate impact liability stripped. 3 of those last 4 are R01 Bucket B firings, selective relaxation of small actor surveillance, exactly what the framework's pre-registered refinement predicted in April. 3 of them in 8 days. Glass rails closing on illicit networks at the top, glass rails opening on small actors at the bottom. Selective architecture, Bucket A and Bucket B running simultaneously, exactly as predicted. So when people ask whether something is happening, the answer the documented evidence supports is yes. Something has been happening for 9 years. The architecture has been under continuous construction the entire time. The legal authority, EO 13818, has been renewed every December for 9 straight years across 2 administrations. The asset accumulation policy has been operational since 2018. The capability to trace money for a decade was already in place a decade ago. The annual renewals never stopped across COVID, across two presidential elections, across two midterms, across every political fight imaginable. What changed in 2024-2026 isn't that the operation started. What changed is that the operation became visible. The headlines you're seeing now, the $15 billion Bitcoin forfeiture, the 30 lawyer indictment, the Sinaloa governor case, the Russian Defense Ministry purges, the Chinese PLA death sentences, the Saudi Nazahah sweeps, the Cambodian senator designation. Those aren't separate stories. They are the same story, surfacing on the same timeline, because the operating authority that enables all of them is on the same 9-year arc. There is a historical parallel worth holding in mind because it explains why this is happening now and not at some other time. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the United States built a new international monetary order. Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau presided. Treasury's chief international economist, Harry Dexter White, chaired the IMF Commission. The Fed, in the words of its own institutional history, participated by offering advice and counsel. The U.S. Treasury was the lead institutional actor. The Fed was secondary. That arrangement persisted until 1951. When the Treasury Federal Reserve Accord established the modern Fed's institutional independence. The Fed's own history calls March 1951 the liberation of monetary policy and Federal Reserve Independence Day. However, in 2026, the Federal Reserve has been excluded from every major piece of the new financial architecture. It declined to join the April 7th BSA AML overhaul. It hasn't finalized the reputation risk parallel rule. It has no role in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It has no joint role in the Genius Act stablecoin architecture. It's not at the table on the Layer 3 sovereign reserve instrument. Treasury Secretary Bessent is publicly framing the supervisory reform, not the Fed chair. The Fed retains interest rate setting authority. That is the only domain in which it remains primary. Across every other institutional domain, Treasury has assumed primacy. This pattern, Treasury primacy across supervisory architecture, reserve architecture, sanctions implementation, public framing of financial system reform, with the Fed reduced to its narrowest core function, is consistent with structural reversion to pre-1951 institutional positioning. The 1951 Accord came after Bretton Woods, not before. If 2026 is structurally analogous to 1944, the question for the next 6 months is what the 2026 equivalent of the 1951 Accord eventually looks like and whether one is coming at all. So here's where the framework is today, May 10th, 2026, 13 pre-registered predictions confirmed, 0 falsified. EO13818 has been renewed 9 consecutive years across 2 administrations. The Bitcoin auction halt has held since 2018, 200,000 Bitcoin in Treasury custody before the executive order that named the policy. 5 sovereigns dismantling the same network class without ever announcing they were doing it. This is not theory. This is documentation. The work continues. The framework holds. The architecture is being built, and it has been being built for longer than 3 years, longer than 5 years, longer than 7 years. The piece of the iceberg above the waterline is the part that became visible in 2024-2026. The piece below the waterline goes back to 2017, and the foundation under that goes back to 2001, the Patriot Act. The question isn't whether something is happening. The question is whether you're watching closely enough to see what comes next. I'm the guy on the couch, and you have been debriefed.